Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. What's up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going through my start sits at the quarterback position, going through every single matchup, and I'm going to have thumbnails down below if you guys just want to jump around to whatever quarterbacks you guys own. That is totally fine. But all I ask is that while you guys are watching this, if you're enjoying the content, please just do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. You can ask me any fantasy questions down below and I'll be responding to every single person. But let's just get right into the Thursday night matchup where we have the Packers traveling to Arizona to take on the Cardinals. And both of these quarterbacks are going to be pretty solid starts for me. It definitely hurts Aaron Rodgers that it looks like Devontae Adams is going to be out, but I still think, he's going to be a solid play. He may not be like a, mid-tier QB1 this week, maybe more on like the fringe of top 10, top 12, but definitely someone I think you can still plug in there. Kyler Murray, per usual, is a top-tier fantasy option. Then moving on to Sunday, we have the Bengals taking on the Jets. And for the Bengals, Joe Burrow is definitely a start. This Bengals offense has been clicking as of late. The Burrow to Chase connection has just been fantastic. And then you still have guys like T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, and some of those other running backs are getting work out of the backfield as well. On the other side, with the Jets, whether it's Mike White or Joe Flacco, I am just not interested. I don't think I've listed Zach Wilson as a start one time, and so I'm definitely not going to be listing either of those two quarterbacks. In this next divisional game, we have the Titans taking on the Colts, and both of these guys are going to be starts. They're both kind of on the fringe here. The Tennessee Titans' overall offense has looked a lot better as of late. This is a tough matchup against the Colts, but I still think you could be starting Ryan Tannehill. For Carson Wentz, like I mentioned, also on the fringe here. He's been playing well as an NFL quarterback. He just hasn't had much of a ceiling for fantasy because they just haven't been asking him to do a ton. This is a Titans secondary that has been banged up. They're struggling with injuries, and so I do think Carson Wentz could kind of take advantage of that this week. Rams-Texans is up next here, and for the Rams, this is a no-brainer start for Matthew Stafford. This game is probably going to get pretty ugly pretty quickly, and Matthew Stafford is going to have a nice fantasy day. On the other side, with the Texans, whether it's Tyrod Taylor or Davis Mills, they're both going to be sits. Just not enough firepower on this Texans offense. I'm really hoping that Tyrod Taylor is back just for Brandon Cook's value, because he is definitely the far superior quarterback and looked pretty good to start off the season, but still, I just don't want either of these guys cracking into my starting lineup. Then we have a divisional game between the Steelers and the Browns, and it's just going to be sits all across the board. Ben Roethlisberger really just hasn't shown much this year. He's done enough to kind of support the weapons around him, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and Najee Harris, but not enough for him to be a super fantasy relevant guy. With the Browns, Baker Mayfield may play in this game, still banged up. He has that shoulder problem. If he plays, still don't want him in my lineup. This is a run-focused team. Same thing with Case Keenum. Next game here is between the Eagles and the Lions. And for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts is a locked-in start every single week. It's pretty crazy because when you actually watch the Eagles play, Jalen Hurts does not look good. He does not look like a super capable NFL quarterback. And so you watch and it doesn't look pretty. It's pretty ugly. And then you look at his fantasy stat line and he's like a guaranteed 20 plus points every single week. And it's because he has that rushing upside. So it's pretty impressive that someone can play poorly and still put up stud fantasy numbers. So he is a lock in lineups. On the other side with Jared Goff, there's just really no way you'd be playing him ever. I think he's been a sit every single week for me. Not enough firepower on that offense, so he is going to be on the bench. Next up, it's a matchup between the 49ers and the Bears, and both of these quarterbacks are going to be sits. It looks like Trey Lance is going to be ready to go, but they're still sticking with Jimmy G as the starting quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo just has not shown much this year. He has not looked good, and it's honestly a little bit concerning that they don't want to go to Trey Lance because you've seen what Jimmy G has done, and if they still think he's better than Trey Lance, a little bit concerning. On the other side with Fields, he's just not there yet. This offense is not going to help him out at all. Coaching staff, very subpar. The offensive line is bad, and so it's just not going to happen this year for Justin Fields. We have the Panthers traveling to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. Sam Darnold had a really hot start to the season and has just cooled off dramatically. Actually got benched at the end of the Week 7 game, so he's a sit. Just not a lot of confidence there with Sam Darnold. On the other side, Matthew Stafford is trending in the opposite direction. He started off looking rough. The Falcons offense looked lost. Last few weeks, they've started to pick it up, and so Matt Ryan is going to be a start for me. Dolphins Bills are up next, and honestly, Tua has been pretty solid as a fantasy asset this season. I still just don't trust him. He hasn't looked great out there, and this is a tough Bills defense, so he's going to be a sit. On the other side, with Josh Allen, he is a locked-in starting quarterback every single week of the season. Then we've got the Patriots traveling to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. For the Patriots, Mac Jones is coming off a big win against the Jets. Patriots put up 53 points, but this is a totally different matchup. Mac Jones just isn't going to have that type of ceiling on a week-to-week basis, and so he is going to be a sit. On the other side, with Justin Herbert, they had a Week 7 bye, and if you remember back to Week 6, that team did not look good. I think they're going to rebound here, and Justin Herbert will put up, some fantasy relevant numbers once again and be a solid play in lineups here in Week 8. Then we have a game between the Jaguars and the Seahawks, and both of these quarterbacks are going to be sits. I do think Trevor Lawrence is trending upwards. He's going to get better throughout the season. I just don't trust him in my lineup right now. He's more of a guy who may be a potential play, Week 10 or later. On the other side with Geno Smith, he's really just looked terrible as the starting quarterback for the Seahawks. Really no other way to put it. He has the weapons around him. He just has not performed. Next up, it's the Washington football team taking on the Broncos. For Washington, Taylor Heinicke was one of these quarterbacks on the fringe. Started off pretty well, had some slower games, played well against the Packers in terms of fantasy, so I ended up going with him as a start. This Broncos defense is definitely not the juggernaut that we kind of were expecting coming into the season, so I do think if you're desperate, Heinicke would be a fair play. On the other side with Teddy Bridgewater, even though it looks like Jerry Jeudy is coming back, I'm just not trusting the ceiling on Teddy Bridgewater. We've got a divisional game between the Buccaneers and the Saints, and even though this is a rough matchup for opposing quarterbacks, Tom Brady has got to be a start. He has been lighting it up to start off the season. On the other side with Jameis Winston, even though this is a good matchup for quarterbacks, I just haven't seen enough from him to really want him in my lineup. The Saints offense has struggled. They've kind of won in these gross games, so I'm just going to be passing on Jameis in my starting lineup. Then moving on to the Cowboys taking on the Vikings for Sunday Night Football. Both of these quarterbacks are players that I feel confident in my starting lineup, so both Dak and Kirk are going to be solid plays this week. Then the final game of the week, the Giants taking on the Chiefs. Daniel Jones has kind of been on this fringe. Right now, I listed him as a sit, and that's just because we don't know about the status of a lot of his wide receivers. If we find out that Shepard and Kadarius Toney are back, or Shepard and Galladay are back, then I would actually switch this to a start. But right now, we don't know the health of those guys, so he's going to be a sit. On the other side, Patrick Mahomes was miserable in Week 7, but we still have to remember, even when he wasn't playing well, going into Week 7, he was still the QB1 in points per game, so he is still a very confident start moving forward. Kind of reminded me of that Aaron Rodgers Week 1. It's going to affect his stats for the rest of the season, but basically every other game since then has been solid. That is going to wrap it up for my quarterback start sits. If you guys enjoyed the content, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys for stopping by. I'll be posting my tight end start sits later today, and then I already put out my running backs and wide receivers yesterday, so go check all that out. But thank you, and I'll see you next time.